The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask may be one of the most talked about games in the entire Legend of Zelda series. With its huge break from traditions, its dark and often surreal tone, not to mention its unique, if not also frustrating, time mechanic that verged on light survival horror elements at times, Majora's Mask is truly a standout in the franchise. But of all the conversations and reviews and retrospectives that I've seen to mark the game's 20th year anniversary, one aspect never seems to get mentioned. Majora's Mask wasn't just a quickly developed and released follow-up to the groundbreaking success of Ocarina of Time, it was also a Y2K game, a dark mirror for the digital age. It's easy today to forget that Y2K was taken in any way seriously. But as the 20th century was drawing to a close, the possibility that digital technology could be facing its doomsday was no small potatoes. If digital society ran like one big clock, Y2K threatened to knock that clock off its rhythm completely. Y2K triggered, quote, worries of an epidemic-like panic that had international markets holding their breaths leading up to the turn of the century, end quote. Think about how fragile digital information is, especially if you're a games developer, and your entire career depends on digital machines. Now, the N64 itself wasn't going to be affected by the Y2K bug, but the prospect of the Y2K bug, or as it was also known, time bomb, could drop like a meteor or moon out of the sky and wipe out all of the systems that made global society, from airlines to the stock market, function, it was a big deal. Y2K also confronted the world with a lot of questions that went deep into the very nature of how the digital age had altered our sense of things like memory, identity, and time. Things like, how would the 20th century and all the centuries before it be remembered in the 21st? Majora's Mask brought across the nightmare of having nothing more than something like random access memory upon which to store your entire life. It was a metaphor for the frailty and caprice of our technology, and in the wake of Ocarina of Time, which already had featured prominently the both theme and mechanic of time, it would prove a powerfully resonant one. In Majora's Mask, after 3 days of in-game time, the clockwork-like system, that is Termina, perhaps a linguistic spin off either the word for a final destination, terminus, or that of a computer terminal, after that 3 days passes, the system crashes. Majora is like a bug concealed within the system's code, that only by carefully debugging one section of the map, as it were, at a time, can Link restore the Zelda program operation to its normal set specs. Sure, Ocarina also had you clearing bad guys by bouncing forward and backwards in time, but Majora's Mask was so unique because it consisted of one big clockwork, as we see by the literal giant clock. Notice how there's a big party on the final night, the so-called Festival of Time, almost like it's New Year's. Now you may know why. We could go really crazy if we wanted to and speculate that each mask you need to transform into the proper role to tackle a given region is not unlike changing Link's status in terms of the access control from a user to an admin, but that's not only speculative, it's a bit over my head as a major computer science noob. But you don't have to be Tim Berners-Lee to know that Majora's Mask is a game about, at least thematically, the impish menace that was Y2K. The cataclysm that you must endure over and over again in the game is at bottom a data wipe. The game, like Ocarina, utilizes 2 timelines, but unlike Ocarina, one of these timelines is outside the game somewhat. This is why it features such an unusual save system. Nearly nothing in the digital world of Majora's Mask can survive. This cleverly seems to comment on the nature of digital data, particularly pointedly given the context of Y2K. The only information that can be saved about side quests is that inside Link's Bomber Notebook, which is the only way to keep track of all the many scheduled events going on around you. There was also, ironically, one of the several kinds of locations in serious potential danger thanks to Y2K, a bank. The central theme of Majora's Mask is memory, which of course has applications to the mind as well as to machines. As soon as Link picks up the Ocarina, for example, he has a flashback to the last time he saw Zelda, which helps him remember the Song of Time. songs become a kind of memory by proxy in the game. Like when Link plays the new wave bossa nova to restore Princess Lulu's voice. The bond between Link and Epona can't be restored until Romani reteaches you Epona's song. And in a way, the Skull Kid only seems to get rid of the mask's corruption for good once he regains his own memories, including the time in Ocarina that Link taught him Saria's song. One hint about the relevance of Y2K to Majora's Mask may have to do with the Mayans. The first boss in the game, Odolwa, supposedly speaks Mayan during the encounter. Now, the Mayans were a civilization that are said to have suddenly disappeared in an almost Y2K or Majora's Mask-esque cataclysm. In 2012, a conspiracy theory predicted the end of days because that was as far ahead as the Mayan long calendar measured the present cycle of the age. Y2K was something similar, given that it represented going outside the capacity of the time-telling system that many computers and programs and computer languages used. In fact, another Y2K may be right around the corner. The so-called 2038 problem will be, according to HowStuffWorks.com, easier to fix, but will affect precisely the programming language that the N64, as well as many other digital machines, use, C. Quote, C uses the standard 4-byte format, which assumes that the beginning of time is January 1st, 1970 at 12 midnight. This value is 0. Yet because a signed 4-byte integer has a max value of 2,147,483,647, the maximum value of time before C's internal clock rolls over to a negative and therefore invalid value translates to January 19th, 2038. On this date, any C programs that use the standard time library will start to have problems with data calculations. End quote. It is only once you get a version of the same 3-day program up and running with all the correct fixes implemented that instead of the entire system crashing, Majora can be isolated as the bug that he is and patched out for good. Even the moon is stuck in reverse gear if you buy the theory of the giant impact hypothesis, which claims that the moon first formed by a meteor striking the Earth. It's going backwards in time in a way, as it's pulled towards its own origin as part of the terrain of the Earth. This, of course, may be a coy nod to the fact that when the clock rolled over to 00, the whole essence of the Y2K problem was whether or not the computer would recognize this as the year 2000 or as the year 1900. I'd argue the motif we keep seeing in Majora's Mask is about the danger in the digital age not only of a Y2K-like crash, but of information itself once it's lodged free of its proper context. Majora's Mask, we're told, was an ancient relic that had been used by a long-dead tribe in hexing rituals. The dead who roam the earth in the east, meanwhile, are fighting a war they've forgotten they died in centuries earlier. And the moon has forgotten its proper place in the sky. Also consider for this point how many of the same character models from Ocarina have changed identities in Majora's Mask. How Princess Zelda, you know, the character the entire series is named after, remains curiously absent. The reverse of what it should be. And how there is not one fairy but a binary, 2 fairies, who seem to have forgotten fairies are supposed to help the hero, not his arch-villain. We see similar duplications in the Romani Ranch, as well as with the Gorman brothers. The various masks that Link must wear house the spiritual data of deceased beings, from the Deku Butler's dead son, to the dead Goron warrior Darmani III, who died trying to save his race from eternal winter and failed, to the Zoro guitarist, Mikao, who dies before our very eyes. Obviously not everything in Majora's Mask connects back to the Y2K panic, but other aspects of how the game speaks to the digital age at the turn of the century include its motifs of shadows and masks. Termina is the shadow version of Hyrule in a sense, just as Majora is something like the shadow of Skull Kid. This duality between identities is at the core of the game's mask mechanic, and I'd argue that the way Skull Kid, not to mention Link, become empowered under the anonymity beneath masks conveys something timely about the facelessness of the early internet era. Before the advent of social media, your identity online was much more concealed. Usernames differed from site to site, allowing a single individual many different possible identities. Yet, psychologists who've studied the online world in the wake of the game, like John Suler, posit the existence of something called the online disinhibition effect. The anonymity, as well as other factors of digital discourse, can distort one's persona and lead them to do things online they'd likely never consider doing IRL. Was the Skull Kid emboldened by the eldritch power of the mask, not unlike what today we call a troll? Fortunately, thanks to all the preparations that were done, the Y2K crisis simply fizzled out. But in a way, the fact that the meaning behind the game did not survive in terms of its context across the years is a small testament to what I believe Nintendo was going for with it all along. Memories and context, you might say, are more than just data, yet for this very reason, they aren't as easy to keep in circulation. As digital information has only increased in speed and size since 20 years ago, it's maybe easier than ever for important things to get wiped out and lost, not survive the reboot. Digital data is no less vulnerable than ever. So for Termina's sake, back up your files. Until next time, boss.